Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Glad you're here. All right. Again, welcome. Thank you all for joining. Our session today is titled Restorative Justice as Community Peacebuilding, a Restorative Approach to Hate-Related Harm. The session is part of Peace Week 2025 at the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. My name's Susan Hirsch. I'm a faculty member at George Mason. And it's really a delight to welcome you all here. Peace Week has been going on now for 5 years. We do it twice a year at George Mason. It started as a response to the pandemic and a desire really to offer some connection while all of us were feeling pretty isolated. It continues now as a space for connection, for creativity, for the co-construction of knowledge, and we hope for action. This year's Peace Week theme is bridging peace building, development, and security. And I think tonight's session will really be a wonderful contribution to that theme. Let me say that in just a moment, I am going to introduce our panelists for tonight. But I want to note that your voice as audience members also matters, and we invite open, respectful participation from you as well. And with that in mind, Carter School asked me to just give you a couple quick reminders. Please mute if you're not speaking. Realize that we are recording this session, and it will be available afterwards quite widely. Participants we hope will have time to answer questions at the end of the session. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. They'll be curated. We hope to get to a number of them. And if we don't, we're going to find some ways to follow up afterwards. So thank you again for coming to this session and for being part really of Peace Week. So I couldn't be more pleased to have a session with my friends and colleagues at Restorative Arlington. The Carter School and Restorative Arlington have been collaborating for about 5 years. Our relationship is strong, it's mutual, and many Carter School students and alumni have worked with Restorative Arlington and have really benefited from its presence and its work in the county and beyond. Tonight, we're taking up a really incredibly interesting and important topic. How do we respond effectively to hate-related harm in our communities? It's hard to dispute that hate-filled discourse, direct threats, violence have escalated in recent years, especially in recent months. And in this session, we're going to explore how restorative justice has been used to address hate-related harm. We really have an extraordinary set of participants with us tonight with direct experience in cases of using RJ, where RJ's been used to address hate-related harm. And I wanna get to them right now. So each of the panelists I'm going to introduce have many accomplishments. They have impressive resumes of education and positions that they've held. So my hope is they'll excuse me if I just talk about their title and their activities that they're engaged in right now that are pertinent to our session. Let me first introduce Kimiko Leidy. She is Restorative Arlington Director of Special Projects, and she is the founding executive director of Restorative Arlington. Very happy to have you here tonight, Kimiko. Next, I'll introduce Roman Hayford. Roman is the current executive director at Restorative Arlington, and just thrilled to have him with us tonight. And both he and Kimiko are RJ facilitators as well. Final panelist is Heather Kimball. Really happy to have Heather here. She is a Restorative Arlington RJ facilitator, and circle keeper. So some earlier publicity mentioned that Erica Washington might be able to join us. Erica's been a Restorative Arlington facilitator, and she's a leading light in restorative justice nationwide, really. She's unable to come tonight. We will also be welcoming some special guests who have participated in RJ processes, and they're going to be introduced by our panelists as their role comes up in our discussion. I want to also thank Rachel Heiler, who is our Director of Operations at Restorative Arlington. Rachel is our tech host tonight, and I am very glad that she's here. So I will always have a lot of confidence that things are going to go well when Rachel is in the Zoom room. Again, let me remind you, please put questions in the chat. We're going to try to get to them. And I want to now have us appreciate some of the groundwork, maybe lay some groundwork about restorative justice and specifically Restorative Arlington. Roman, I'd like to turn to you, if I can, to speak about Restorative Arlington, restorative processes, generally whatever you would like to say to get us started as we begin to think about RJ for hate-related harm. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Good evening, everybody. Peace Week, homies, friends, relatives. I'm excited to talk a little bit about Restorative Arlington. But first, as a facilitator, we're on Zoom. Let's all get a little bit connected here. I welcome everybody to sort of do a quick stretch with me to bring us all together into the space. So lift your arms straight up. And with that uplifting energy, we remember, take a moment as we breathe deep, that conflict is sacred. Conflict is the other side of peace. And just bringing that energy back down together into our seats, wherever we are. Thank you for that. It's a little mindful moment there. And I also want to say thank you first to George Mason for inviting us. One of our many partners in Arlington. George, the school, the Carter School, is a formal partner of Restorative Arlington and provides us space and other support, in addition to sharing colleagues like Susan here, who's part of the glue here. Everything is about relationships. And I just have a super quick story. Long before Restorative Arlington, actually before I even got formally into restorative justice, about a year before, the Carter School has a special place in my heart. I remember that a friend and collaborator of mine named Michael Verdon, who was a master's student at the Carter School, and he's an artist. He's a temple designer. He builds temples specifically for peace and healing. And one of his first temples was burned on the lake at the George Mason School. And burning the temple is a ritual act of catharsis, of putting things in the temple that we want to let go of. And together we stood around the lake and burned that temple. And it was this creative moment for art and for peace and for healing. And it was like right after that I launched my restorative justice career. So it's all coming full circle here at the Carter School. And here I am now with Restorative Arlington with a number of our colleagues here. So Restorative Arlington is a restorative practices nonprofit serving Arlington, Northern Virginia, but also in connection with the restorative justice movement nationwide. And one of the things we do, which we'll be talking about today, one of our core functions, is called our Heart of Safety program, which is a restorative justice diversion program and conferencing program. And what that means is facilitators like me or Kimiko or Heather will work with folks who are involved in the criminal justice system, meaning there's been a crime or a harm, and in partnership with the prosecutors of the Office of the Commonwealth Attorneys, we will suspend that case where everybody who's involved consents. We'll suspend the prosecution of the harm through the normal process, and we as facilitators will then engage with the person harmed, their families, the persons responsible for the harm who are being charged with a crime. We will engage them, see if they're interested in resolving that harm through a restorative justice conference. And that's where we work with them ahead of time to understand where they're at, both parties, and then when they consent, we bring them together for a face-to-face meeting where we talk about what happened, who was impacted, and what needs to happen to make it right and make sure it doesn't happen again. And many times when we get to that point, we are able to resolve the harm in that way, and then the case is dismissed from the criminal justice process. And so we'll give you some examples of what that looks like today in the hate crime context. And I just want to say that we're super grateful to our partners at the Office of the Commonwealth's Attorney, who over the years have developed this deep belief in the power of restorative justice and have been learning along with us how powerful that can be for this community. And we're really at an all-time high in our collaboration with them, I'm happy to say. And they have become confident. Our prosecutors in this county have become confident to refer even serious harms to our facilitators to go through restorative justice, which is a huge win for Arlington. It's a huge win for restorative justice. And finally, we're talking about hate crimes today, which are particularly sensitive. And the reason we also are excited to be able to take these sorts of cases and use restorative justice is because part of our mission at Restorative Arlington is about addressing systemic, multi-generational harms and other barriers, like these real calcified barriers to our community thriving. And we have found that hate crimes, they're particularly emotionally charged and they affect everybody in the community, right? That's why they make such a big splash in the news. That's why they've created these special categories in the criminal context for them, because it affects all of us in these different, in some ways, deeper ways even. They affect our values, a sense of our shared values and community. And so we feel that it's particularly important to have processes for safely engaging and learning from hate crimes in particular. And we also learn that what we learn from hate crimes, is highly diagnostic of our broader social concerns and the underlying causes. What we learn from processing hate crimes through restorative justice, and I think you'll get a sense of that today when we talk about some specific cases. So with that, finally, Restorative Arlington. Like I said, we're here. Learn more about us. We are expanding our scope of our MOUs, not just in Arlington, but also in Prince William County and elsewhere. And recently, we've even lifted the age restriction on who's eligible for restorative justice. And last year, we received a $1.5 million grant, along with 11 other jurisdictions nationwide, to pioneer restorative justice pathways for sexual harm and intimate partner violence. So a lot of good stuff happening with Restorative Arlington.
Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to hear the range of things that are happening, and through Restorative Arlington, it's so exciting for our Arlington community and beyond. And also, I think this gives us a really good way in for beginning to talk about cases. And again, I'm just really glad that we're able to have participants, people who were facilitators, people who participated, talk directly about the experience. So I'm going to turn to Roman again to talk about the case that you've been involved with, and then I'll turn. Then he'll kick it off to other panelists and others who are here to talk about specific cases and. What were they about? How did the restorative process go? What were some of the outcomes? I think we're all wanting to understand and hear some of the details of how this actually works. So if I can toss it back to you, thank you, Roman.
I feel like I've been talking a lot. I almost wish we'd switched up the order, but I'll go ahead. Thank you, Heather and Kimiko, for letting me kick us off here. Okay, so we had a case recently that I facilitated with Erica, who Susan mentioned, and I'm joined here by one of the participants in our conference, who's Mike Gittens, and I'm going to turn it over to Mike a little bit so you can hear directly from one of our participants. But before I do that, I want to say a few things about confidentiality, which is really important in our process. So our restorative justice process is a confidential process that's part of our MOU with our system partners, and it's a bedrock understanding and reliance for our participants. And what that means is a number of things, like it helps people who are responsible feel comfortable that nothing that they talk about in a conference will be used against them in court and things like that. But it also helps people feel comfortable really sharing openly and from the heart with one another, fellow participants in the conference. And so I actually spoke with the person responsible in Mike's case here about this presentation today, and asked them how they felt about wanting to talk about the case. And they were very supportive and enthusiastic, and they're doing quite well. Actually, this conference wasn't really that long ago, so we're still in the phase where they're fulfilling their agreement. The person responsible is fulfilling their restorative agreement. So that's one. But even so, we are going to maintain a certain degree of anonymity here. We're not going to use names or even place names just to try to minimize and maintain confidence and respect for the participants. So this was a case where you all can place yourselves in election night last year, and all the emotions around that, and the different political factions, different feelings about that. And we have a young man who was excited about the election results and wanted to stay out, had gone to a sort of watch party for the Republican Party, and he was excited about the results of the election and had been drinking, and decided to stay out and went to a bar in the Arlington area and had a few more drinks and struck up a conversation with some folks at the bar, two gentlemen actually, who also happened to be Black. And this first gentleman is a white gentleman, or white presenting. And the conversation seemed to go okay at first, but at a certain point, there was kind of an eruption of tension between the first gentleman and these other two friends, and the initial gentleman, the first gentleman, actually ended up sort of assaulting the other two, and even brandishing tasers and things like that. The police were called, and this person was arrested. And obviously, in addition to that, perhaps most alarming was, as this was all happening and this was escalating, this first gentleman was yelling and using the N-word toward the other two. And Mike here was, so fast forward, so this case gets referred to us, and I'm asked to facilitate this case along with another facilitator, Erica. And it was a little bit of a challenge for me personally, just because of I had to check whether I could be objective in facilitating this case because it brought up emotions for me. But ultimately, I decided that it was important to test our process, even in a case that's not like a normal case, and where my allegiances might be flipped from what they normally are, or like. And I felt that was important for me, just as a practitioner, to take the case, because restorative justice as a process shouldn't only work when it feels like what I expect in terms of who's being served or who's being given the opportunity. It should be a process that works for any makeup of participants. And we can learn a lot from doing it in a case like this. I can learn a lot. And so as we went through the process of meeting the people involved, and the young man was interested in proceeding, and the two victims were interested as well, we asked them as part of our process, do you want anyone to support you? And they named Mike here as a supporter for them. And maybe Mike, I'll ask you to first let our listeners here, our guests here, let them know, why do you think they asked you to support them in this process?
Thanks, Roman. As he mentioned, I was the victim's advocate. I was chosen by someone close to me to support. And at first, I didn't know what I was getting into. I'm not sure I understood exactly what this was. He started to describe it, and then I had a call. I believe it was with Erica, to kind of frame what this conversation would be like. My friend chose me because these are the sorts of conversations we have in our community all the time about crime and how punishment is doled out. How sometimes it's fair, sometimes it's massively unfair. And in this case, he was a victim, and unfortunately, we have the common bond that we share those same experiences growing up as minority youth in America. So he knew I would understand, but he also knew I had the ability to be objective during the process as well too, and I think that's why he chose me ultimately.
Thanks, Mike. I was actually thinking, though, if you want to say a little bit about the difference in your temperaments.
Oh, yeah. I know we're not using names here, but the victim is a little bit more reserved, and it takes some time. Once you get to know him, he gets out of his shell. I am very, as a matter of fact, and probably a little bit more forward when it comes to expressing myself. So, uh, I for what I do for a living, I express my opinions pretty boldly, and that carries over. It's natural for me, and you know, you got to be able to say the thing that nobody wants to say, but in a positive and constructive way. Because there's what we say, and then there's what other people hear. And sometimes we
So
can't always control what they hear.
great. Yeah. So you, Mike, really turned out to be an important balancing person from his more introverted victim friend, which just gives us a sense of how restorative justice can be really great in that way, because you never know who's going to be harmed in a crime, but because they can rely on loved ones to support them in the process is flexible for that. We see how it can be really advantageous in that way compared to
Yeah,
a
Roman,
normal process. Yes.
I would say a real life example. If you've ever been in a really bad relationship where all your good friends on the outside can see what's going on, but you can't see what's going on,
That's a
and
great example.
and then if there are people you trust, they know how to articulate that to you in a way that you'll receive it. But when you're so close to it, sometimes it can be hard to look at things objectively. And in this case, where there was a racial epithet combined with an actual assault, that stirs a lot of emotions. And as much as I feel like I'm good at expressing myself, if I were in his situation, I would need someone else, I think, to be there to help me center myself. And is this what is the outcome, potential outcome here, what you really want? And that's what restorative justice is about. What I learned, it's about outcomes. It's about changing outcomes through changing processes and the way that we look at how the criminal justice system is producing either better members of society or repeat offenders.
And this was your first encounter with restorative justice, right?
It was.
And so take us back and think, bring everybody who's listening here along with you. When I first met with you, or when Erica first met with you, I can't remember which one of us met with you
Erica.
first. How were you feeling about what happened and about defending your friend? And take us through from that point and walk us through this whole story of your participation from that and then into the conference and what ended up happening for you. How were you feel? But let's start with, how were you feeling at first about everything?
Angry. Angry at what happened to my friend, but that those things continue to happen to certain members of the community at an alarming rate. And we live, I grew up in a lot of places. My dad was in the Army, and I grew up in a lot of places that were very diverse, places where there were, if I could use some more plain language, where there were a lot of black people, and places where there were no black people. And I was the only person seemingly of African American descent. And you learn how to relate and get along with everybody because you have to. And so coming out of a very diverse environment, but like back to the South, and when I say South, I mean Alabama, for high school, it was hard. It was hard because it feels like at times all anyone sees around you is black and white. So when that tunnel vision on black and white spills over into criminal justice, into education, into everything that we experience living in a community, it can be very difficult to deal with. And when you have enough of those experiences, it hardens you a little bit to the other side of it, right? Which is just the same way that tunnel vision, it can be good and bad. And for the people who grow up on the bad side, one of the things that I've learned is mostly racism is taught. It's learned growing up. It's about environment. It's not about not being around enough people who are not like you to have empathy for people who are not like you. It does not only exist in white communities. I can tell you that as somebody who's traveled a lot. When you go other places, that same bias exists in other communities where they are isolated and there is not a lot of contact with people of different cultures. So I was very angry because it felt unnecessary. What happened felt so unnecessary. And we live in a time where we have so much access to learn about other people. We are walking around with supercomputers in our pockets. I was telling a friend the other day, like, I don't remember the last time I had to memorize a phone number because we have access to so much information, but we're using it to catch Pokemon instead of learning about the people who we shared the earth with. And so I felt very angry because it just felt so unnecessary in today's day and age, especially someplace like Arlington, where I feel like there's a good mix of different backgrounds and political beliefs, and there should be room to disagree, but not hate each other.
So when it came to, I want to zero in on the restorative justice piece in particular. I know that you were a little maybe on guard or vigilant about the process initially. Can you say a few words about that? What was that about? What were
Oh
you
yeah.
worried about?
Oh yeah. Like, so first of all, Erica is amazing. Give her a
Yes, she is.
raise. Yeah, yeah, right. Like, I came into the process and I listened to what she had to say. This sister is very, very articulate, and she did a great job laying out what restorative justice is. But I did come away from that conversation thinking this is la la land. Like, I don't know if this is I don't know if this is something that has a high chance of being successful. So I came in skeptical about whether or not, in this particular case, this was the type of person who could be affected positively by a restorative justice process. So yeah, I mean, I thought our presentation was amazing, but my experiences, I had to fight my experiences to say, okay, give this a chance. Don't shut this down. You can't participate in this and shut down the possibility that this could work. So yeah, I came in skeptical. I think Erica and our intake, Roman, was, I think we booked like 30 minutes and we ended up on the phone for like an hour and a half because I was going back at her a little bit, and she was like, well, I would encourage you to look up some things. She gave me some resources. I definitely dug into them after because I didn't want to be an uneducated participant in this process. But yeah, it seems very frou-frou at first, and I don't know. I was like, I don't know if this is grounded in reality. I don't know if this reflects the reality of the world that we live in and people's capacity for change. But she said one thing that softened me to the process. And she said, Mike, I have to believe that people can change. I have to, because if people cannot change, then what hope is there? I do a podcast that gets about 250,000 downloads a month, and we talked about this idea of hope and what happens when hope dies in anything. You know, when there is no hope, it changes the dynamic of how we interact in the world we live in. When we believe there is no hope, we act in desperation. When we believe there's no hope, right, we act not in good faith because we predetermined an outcome. There's no hope. And I said, you know what? You're absolutely right. I'm not very religious, but I am somewhat spiritual, and I do believe that hope is a very powerful thing, and that's really what turned me around when she said that.
So, and then, and so she was able to um, support you to feel
Yes.
like you could take the risk to participate in this, despite the fact that we were talking about something that, if we think too long as Black men about what this guy did to your friend, it's almost like, nah, man, F this. I get that. And so we get to the conference. What happened there for you, and what were you trying to get out of that conference? Tell those, bring us into that engagement you had with the person responsible. What was the alchemy there? What happened between you and him? Tell that part to our guests.
Well, perpetrator is not a good word to use.
You can, don't worry about it. Yeah,
Okay, all right.
we'll talk about. We
Yeah,
generally say person responsible. We try not to use such
fair enough.
right and wrong sort of labels for people in restorative justice, but go ahead.
Yeah, when I saw the other responsible party, we had our cameras on. He had a much softer appearance than I was expecting, based on my description of what went down that night. And uh, I just kind of, metaphorically speaking, tried to close my eyes and just wipe the slate clean. Uh, when he started to talk, it was rough. And Roman and you and I talked about this, privately, but it felt like at first, before I had a chance to speak, that it was, yes, I'm sorry, but here's why I did what I did. And the why, I was like, I don't, in my heart, I was like, is he looking for absolution here? Because there's no absolution for what you did. This is the accountability part. This is where we're trying to describe to you how your actions affected not only the victim, but everybody around him, and how they will behave when they are in situations where they may be around someone who has different political beliefs than them. And I felt like there was a shirking of accountability. So when I had a chance to speak, I wanted to make sure that he understood that in this particular situation, stop me, Roman, if I share a detail that we're not permitted to share.
You can don't share names, but yeah, I'm looking for. I remember very clearly that point where you said, "But I want to know this." That shifted that accountability for him about, and it had to do with the drinking. And I don't want to guide you too much, but I also am trying to help with our time
I don't
frame.
remember exactly how I said it, but I know I did want to understand if
Remember about the decisions you took before? Remember that?
oh yeah, right, yeah, the steps before. It was he made decisions before that night that led to the outcomes that he ended up in. And so I questioned the decision to arm yourself with a taser and then go to a bar where you were going to engage in drinking. Now, I will tell you, I don't know where everybody stands politically here, but I'm very moderate. So I do not mean to offend anybody. I'm not anti-gun, but I also make the choice not to carry a gun. And the reason I don't is because I think that the weapon can create a mentality where you would do something you wouldn't normally do if you didn't have a gun. um, I'll frame this in 20 seconds. I used to live in downtown Phoenix, and I ran into a scenario where I was leaving the gym late at night in an area of downtown Phoenix that's a little seedy. There was a white couple that was following me in the dark, and the wife was on her phone talking to the police. And next thing I know, I'm surrounded by 10 cop cars walking 3 blocks from my skyrise Phoenix apartment. So, I was working in corporate and I was doing very well for myself. And I had on $300 headphones and $300 sneakers and $100 shorts. And the police came up to me, guns drawn, because this couple called the cops on me. And so my dad's a retired police officer, and he told me, he said, hey, if you ever get stopped, keep your hands in plain sight, especially if it's dark outside. Don't make any sudden moves. Don't get yourself killed because of your rights or whatever. Do the right thing, and we'll deal with the legal part later. And so I did everything my father taught me. The outcome of that situation was I was able to disarm the officer. And he said, I think we made a mistake here. And I said, yeah, you made a big one. But if you think that I did something, you know where to find me. I'm at 44 Monroe, right there in downtown Phoenix, 20th floor. Come get me. And the lady who called the police on me, as I was walking away, I could hear her telling the cop, you're just going to let him go? And the female police officer who was with her said, yes, ma'am, that's what we do when people aren't committing crimes. And so they let me go. And I got home and reflected on that situation. And what I told the officer on site, but also I reflected on at home, was they thought I was armed with a gun breaking into cars. That's what they called the cops on me. And I'm like, wait, I don't even believe in carrying guns. But if they were following me in the dark, in the middle of downtown, and they thought I was armed, they were probably armed. Did you check them for a gun? They're the dangerous ones. I'm a threat to nobody. So and it never occurred to the cops that those people might have had a gun. They probably had the ability to take my life. So the decision to go out into a world where you are hyper vigilant all the time is what I questioned him with not a gun, this in this case, but a taser. And then you engage in a discussion with a complete stranger, understanding that you have some very strong beliefs, and you blame it on the alcohol. And this was a lot of the conversation was, well, you know, I get this way when I'm drunk and I understand I'm this way. Then why did you go to a bar with a taser on election night? You created the situation that you fear because they weren't looking for a fight.
And what was his, and how did he, sorry, I do want to move us along because this is so golden, but I want to respect our other facilitators. I mean, imagine if you tried to have that accountability conversation in some random context, it might not have gone over well, but how did he receive that within the conference, and how did it go?
I felt like there was a lot of deflection, a lot of, well, you got to understand, I've had a very hard life. And in my head, I'm like, blah, blah. Okay, what does that have to do with you tasing my friend? You tased him, man. Like you set up a situation that you were 100% gonna fail in most of the time. I don't understand. So could we make better decisions moving forward? Because as I understood, I had this question about restorative justice coming in. Does this, I said, Roman, does this absolve him of any legal consequence down the road? He said, if he completes the process satisfactorily, it does. And I don't know how I felt about that initially, because I was like, all right, but if he breaks down at any point of the process, does my friend have the ability, the right to say, you know what, I withdraw, he's not complying? Will we be kept in the loop on his progress? Because when people are trying to get out of trouble, and this is maybe the more skeptical part of me, they'll make it sound sweet. And I thought that's what he was trying to do there. I said, no. We need some real, if you're going to get out of jail or whatever, the normal stuff that black and brown people, we got to deal with that. We're not giving a get out of jail free card. So if you want to get out of jail free card, we need some genuinely remorseful accountability here. I need you to understand the gravity of what you did. I have a heart condition. The cops tased me, they could take my life. And you may not have been thinking that when you went out, but that could have been the end of that. Or if there were enough black people who were around that were angry at what you said, they could have taken your life.
And to your point with the concrete things, I do recall, and again, you tell me how that ultimately landed for you, and I guess the proof will be in the pudding. But that exchange between the two, you pushed for something real, and I recall him agreeing to something that was kind of surprising to us when it came to him going forward with those sorts of implements, right?
Yeah, I'm not recalling what he agreed to, but you'll have to jog my memory.
Well, there was an agreement around no longer carrying those things.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Even though those were such a big part of his identity and right to carry and things like that, which I was surprised by, and I felt like came really from a consequence of you pushing him on the accountability piece.
Yeah, I mean, if you're admitting that you don't have self-control when you drink, it is not a good idea to carry. All my friends that carry guns, they take gun classes, and one of the things they teach you is that you're responsible for every bullet that leaves that gun. So even if you have good intent when you pull the trigger, if the bullet passes by what you intended to hit and hits a baby in the back, you're responsible for that. And so if you cannot be responsible for the outcomes that action creates, can you commit to not carrying a weapon of any kind until you can be accountable for the consequences that your actions create?
Right. So and so I do. Unfortunately, we need to wrap up. I could talk with you forever about this because there's so much to learn, and maybe there will be time for some follow-ups. But like I said, so far we're still in this period of
We
what we
are.
call plan completion, and the person responsible did complete their inpatient program. They're doing quite well with their plan so far of kind of restarting in a new place and things like that. And so that's kind of where we're at. Mike, is there anything else you wanted to just say? Obviously, you felt strongly enough to give us some of your time this evening, and so grateful that you did. Is there anything else you want to convey about the process or takeaways before we shift to the other facilitators?
Yeah, I mean, if there was a chance that anything that was said in this conference that we did with him that would eventually change his heart, to me, it was better than just lock him up and throw away the key. That can't be I think that methodology has been applied to minority communities, and we've seen how that works out. So, in the interest of trying to bring us closer together, we cannot just then say, well, this is how they do it for us, so this is how we're going to do it for you. So you need to experience the penalties that we've been experienced for you. No, nothing changes until the majority gives a damn about the minority, right? Until the people with power care enough about the people without power. And so this one at a time, if he has these beliefs, he knows other people with these beliefs, and if he can change, maybe he can change some of those people. And that's how we create change. I may never know, but I do know that hope and belief are powerful things when applied in the right scenarios. And that's where again Erica and eventually Roman really softened my heart to the idea that this process could help create some real change in our communities in terms of how we treat each other. Can I treat somebody who I have never met and may never do anything for me in my life with the respect and the grace that I would want, or that I would want for people close to me? So, I hope that's the outcome of this process. Unfortunately, we live in an age where people have access to so much information, and sometimes you've got people out there who prey on the mental vulnerabilities of a young man like this. They make them angry. Step one, make you angry about something. Step two, make you feel isolated. And then step three, present your ideology as the solution to the first two. And that's how they become indoctrinated. And some of the stuff he was saying, I was like, "Ooh, brother, you like, man, I hate our news sometimes. I do. I wish news were just news and not a bunch of people trying to present their opinions as news or their opinions as fact. But that's the world we live in. Over 80% of our country still gets their news from local news. They don't listen to the national, when Trump won in 2016 and all the polls had Hillary winning in a landslide. And there were all these people in rural America that don't watch CNN or Fox News. They just watch their local news, and you can't poll them. And they came out and they voted for the guy who they thought represented their interests, but they still fell prey to the same thing that got this young man in some ways, in terms of not having a well-rounded, and I'm not knocking anybody who voted for Trump. I'm just saying, there were some ideas that were coming out of that felt very isolated, and it was like, whoa. Let me just finish with this, Roman. The decision about walking with the taser, right? He feels unsafe in the world that he lives in. He feels so unsafe that it's dry. This fear, where does fear coming from? Do you know? I said, would it shock you to know that most people are not out to get you, especially not you? So the fear that you feel, you've created.
Right. That was powerful.
Yeah.
We were able to dig into, and this just an example as we transition of of the root causes that can come up and be really discussed on a really nuanced level, even among strangers who, in an adversarial process, you would never get these conversations. So thank you again, Mike. Susan, back to you to pass on for another case example. Thank you, Mike.
Oh my, thank you. Yeah, some appreciation to both of you for sharing. And I think we're getting, as you're saying, Roman, this sense of the, the overarching structures that are bringing these harms into being, and how to use that conference to begin to push back against them. It takes courage. And Mike, thank you for sharing. I think we're feeling that courage and that the struggle that you went through in processing what would it be like to be part of this process.
Yeah, restorative justice has to be about creating enough empathy within both sides for us to be able to see past our own experiences and biases and treat the other person the way that we would want to be treated. It sounds overly simplistic, but that's what it boils down to, right? Can I find enough empathy to treat someone who doesn't have the same background or beliefs as I do, the way I would want somebody to treat me or my daughter or my son or my brother or my parents? And if we can get there, then I think that these things don't happen, right? He forgot. I told him, Susan, in that I said, when you pulled that taser out, you forgot the other person was a human being with parents and a family and some people who love them, and you tased them over political beliefs and then started screaming racial epithets at them. And then you're coming to this saying, I'm not a racist, though I know I did this extremely racist thing, but I'm not a racist. That's a hard sell to the person getting tased.
Yeah.
So, if you had remembered he was a person and a human being that you could have took from this earth that night, if we could make that click in the moment, then we would have made progress.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The pushback against dehumanization that we see happening in so many ways around us. Let me shift then to Heather and Kimiko. Whichever of you would like to go first to talk about another really, really troubling but really important case that we can learn a lot from.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you, Roman and Mike. So much of what you said, especially Mike, I'm already eager to rewatch the recording of this. So I can write down, I can already see Restorative Arlington's website with some quotes that, just from what you've shared, Mike. I think you've gotten to the heart of why we do restorative justice at all, and particularly why we think and we want to keep talking about using restorative practices in response to hate crimes. That you lifted up sort of hope as key, and just your reflection at the very end there about that we need to create enough empathy on both sides, on all sides, to be able to engage together in that space. So powerful. And then I also want to celebrate hope, empathy, but also anger. And I think that this is something that we experienced in our case, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the case that Kimiko and I had the honor to facilitate. But I want to sort of pin that many people, even many of us, when we first learned about restorative justice, thought what Mike did, right? This is sort of la la land. But what we found as we really lean into what does it meaningfully mean to be accountable to one another when we cause harm, anger is a really key part of that. And we've had participants in other cases with Restorative Arlington who've reflected on their experience and said what most surprised them was that their facilitators said made space for them to be angry and to feel out that anger and to express it in a way that would then be productive. And that's the key difference, is that we can find ways to hold anger, to feel it, to learn from it, and then to use it in a way that's going to be productive. So just so delighted to be on the panel with you. Kimiko and I had the real honor to facilitate a case, again, in Arlington County, with 4 individuals two who were harmed by a repeated hate crime. So two women in Arlington County whose house over the course of 5 months had pride flags ripped down from the front of their house, ripped down in ways that sometimes broke the pole, middle of the night. Sometimes they woke up hearing the sound of their flag being ripped down. It happened, can we go 4 or 5 times over 5 months. And they went through a process of, they added ring cameras, they added a second ring camera. They tried posting online to figure out if anyone had any information. Really, really terrifying experience. The 2 young men were ultimately arrested through some police work, but largely through work that this couple did themselves to identify who this could be, to get video footage, to advocate for themselves with the police, with the media. They had a lot of community support. They had neighbors who along their street, they came home one day and all of their neighbors had put up pride flags to support them. So like in the story that Mike was sharing, this impacted these 2 individuals. It also impacted the broader community, everyone who knew them. These 2 women made the choice. They talked with the prosecutors, had a really meaningful conversation with the prosecutor who was assigned to their case, who really listened to them and heard them saying things that made him think, you might be interested in something different than traditional prosecution. So he explained restorative justice to them, others from the prosecutor's office, and they ultimately chose to pursue this path. And so at that point, our organization was brought in, and we met with them. And I won't go through every detail, partially because we want to honor confidentiality and also because we want to have time for questions. But we met over many months with these women who were harmed by this incident, and then individually with 2 young men who had been responsible for in sort of a related, it was a related events, but they had sort of acted separately. We met with them probably, Kimiko, you'll have to correct me, probably about 18 times each with these young men over the course of many months. Not quite as many times, but still quite a bit with these women. And we processed what the harm was, what their experience of the harm was, really dug into all of the myriad ways that they were impacted by what had happened, and spent many, many moons, many months working with these young men to help prepare them to be able to receive that perspective from these women, and for them to be prepared to be able to meaningfully offer what might be needed in order to make things as right as possible. Ultimately, we also worked with them a lot on how they wanted to encounter each other. So the couple who was harmed made a lot of really carefully thought out choices around whether they wanted to meet with both young men together, whether they wanted to meet with them separately, whether they even wanted to have a single conference or split it up to be able to sort of have a pause and some break for them in between sort of all of the sharing that would happen in the conference. So we worked with them on that, and then ultimately had conferences with each of these young men. The young men harmed, or the women harmed had a support person, and the young men each had a support person as well in their conferences. And one thing that Kimiko and I reflected a lot on afterwards is the value of having support people, which is true in every restorative justice conference, but felt especially true because of the nature of the hate crime. And I think, again, Roman and Mike really described this so well, but the ability of a friend or a family member to be able to sort of name what they're seeing from the outside, it was very powerful. I think particularly because the experience of hate crimes can be so interwoven with, and is by definition interwoven with identity, right? And with then questions of who I am and how I am in the world and how I'm going to be perceived by this other person. And so it was very valuable to have support people. Ultimately, the process was successful for all of them. These women were able to move forward feeling safe, feeling like good had come from their experience. And I will just share a little bit. I'm going to put in the chat 2 news pieces that that were published in Arlington and the greater Washington area after this process. If you want to read more, but let me just read this one quote from one of the participants, and then I'll pass to Kimiko for some additional reflections, and then back to Susan. But I want to share this statement from the women who were harmed in this case. They were asked why they chose restorative justice, and they said, honestly, this seemed like a good route to take because we didn't feel like the court process was enough punishment. We wanted both of them to educate themselves around why they did this, what struggles the LGBTQ+ community has faced and continues to face, and why this wasn't just about stealing a pride flag. And then they additionally said, we do want people to know consequences were given. It's not like the cases were just dismissed. There were long-lasting impacts. So that was the close. Kimiko, let me pass to you for some more reflections.
Thanks, friend, and thank you for offering that synopsis. So there were a few things that I really wanted to highlight about the ability of a restorative process to really hold strong, intense emotions, not just anger, but pain, resentment, alienation, humiliation, grief. All of these things, can be held effectively in a well-facilitated, carefully prepared restorative process in a way that allows participants to be really authentic. And I'm really grateful Mike was here and sharing so generously in a way that allowed us to sort of illustrate that, or really allowed him to illustrate that. I do think that in every restorative process, having community members or supporters there for the participants is essential for, emotional support, for community healing, but also for accountability. And I do want to note that when we talk about accountability, we are not just talking about the incident of harm, but like Mike said, we are talking about all the small choices that lead up to that incident. It is very rare, as far as I know, and in my experience of harm and conflict, that someone goes out into the world and says, today I am going to do something that will cause someone else harm. What is much more common is that someone makes a series of choices that do not align with their own values that eventually lead to them causing harm, right? And so so much of the work that we do is to support participants in understanding their values. And I really do mean the participants' values. One of the sort of funny things that a participant said to me once was that they thought that they had signed up for some sort of indoctrination. And, I'm not sure I successfully indoctrinated that participant. They did not indicate that. But it's not really my job to indoctrinate anyone. I don't think anyone on our team would consider that part of their job. But it is our job to help participants understand their own value systems, the core things that are essential and important to who they are and how they want to be in the world, and whether or not the actions that they are choosing, the strategies that they are using in their lives actually do align with their stated values. And often, maybe always, in cases of harm, we find that they in fact do not. Right? That this participant who is responsible for harm has made not just one, but multiple choices that don't align with their values. And when they are able to come to that recognition, then they have a path forward that feels dignified, that feels clear, and that aligns with the way that they might want to live their life anyway, in better aligning with their own values, not ours, not our organizations, not the restorative justice movements, but their own. I also, really wanted to uplift the role that dehumanization and shame plays in this particular type of harm, but in many harms sort of broadly. And that those are also things that we deal with in a restorative process, that when a participant who's responsible for harm has to face the people that they harmed, there is often this deep moment of shame for the dehumanization that they've inflicted on someone else. And I do think that moment holds so much potential for deep, lifelong transformation that we never want to waste it. We want to prepare people very carefully for that moment. We want to build enough trust with our participants that we can highlight it. And we want to have supporters and community members there who can also observe and witness that moment and say, hey, remember that thing. What does that mean for you as we move forward? So just some bits, and thanks to my colleagues for really carefully sharing about these cases. Back to you, Susan.
Yeah, I want to just to tag on to that, Kimiko, to say how important it is to have a well-facilitated conference. I think that's what the audience is really hearing, the kind of careful choices that were made. And Roman spoke a bit about positionality, his own, and having to think that through. And so I just want everybody to appreciate the mindfulness that facilitators need to bring to this work in order to bring about conferences that lead to that accountability that we've been mentioning, and that is so important. The other thing that I've been hearing are, themes that connect to the broader issues around us that are so troubling today in terms of racism and political divisions and homophobia and threats of violence and fears about security. And some of the discussion has gotten to, how do we connect what's happening in that conference space to broader change that we might want to see that would begin to push back against those structures. And so I just wanted to open space for any of the facilitators, and Mike as well, if you had any thoughts on making that leap. Is part of it, sharing deeply the sorts of stories and evolving empathy that participants come to, sharing them in forums like this, or sharing them in other spaces? How do we begin to make that leap? I say that knowing that many people on the call are working in a variety of ways around some of the issues of repression and discrimination that are at the heart. How do we draw on restorative principles, restorative practices, and these processes, perhaps to also do that work?
So one of the things that Roman and I have talked about is the way that often a sense of embattlement in masculinity can really affect the way some of our community members show up in public spaces and interact with each other. And I'd love for for him to share a bit about why that's important in some of these cases in particular.
Yeah, help me out here. I mean, I could not agree more that that is often a conversation we have with, I mean, at the root of so much violence in our society is wounded and toxic masculinity, for sure. And I think certainly that some of that came out in the case that Mike shared about. But Kimiko, if there's something in particular, I need your help. What did you want me to share specifically about?
I think the conversations that I am reflecting on have to do with what it means to be a male-bodied person walking around in the world. What are the choices that feel most available and most nourishing? And what does that look like when it comes to how we deal with conflict, how we deal with feelings of threat, feelings of alienation, feelings of insecurity more broadly? And what does it look like to be a man walking around in the world, really living values around being community centered, working to develop a loving, thriving community in really real ways? And how are we incentivizing that as a community, or maybe sometimes failing to incentivize that?
So good. Susan, were you gonna say something?
I was just going to point, I think the other side of that question is in the chat. How can we reframe masculinity to reduce harm? So I'll just add that in and give you another second to think about how you want to approach this. It's really hard, complicated.
I'm trying to approach it. It's not. I know the conversation that I remember the conversation that Kimiko had, and I think she's looking for something specific, and I just can't remember what it was, but for me, it's just it's embodied by like the change is embodied by Mike today, right? Like Mike is a very masculine presenting man, has a lot going for him, and didn't, unless we're uplifting these opportunities and having men like him who are influencers from the standpoint of traditional masculinity, right? How do we create opportunities for men who are sort of winning in terms of how they present in terms of traditional masculinity, to show their masculinity in this expanded way that is compassionate, that is vulnerable, that had put something at stake for their friends, that, he led by talking about his emotions. This guy's a sportscaster. How many sportscasters talk about that? So, as a, like, and then even getting into things like the importance of Black male joy, and male joy, and these things that I just think there's a lot of quietly or not so quietly suffering men in our communities that don't have outlets to be empowered and to be seen as powerful with these in these sorts of ways. And to me, this kind of learning, this kind of processing leads to genuine empowerment. More questions?
I can just add in some thoughts is, I think Susan, as I heard your initial question about sort of how do we sort of take learning here and make it bigger. I think one of my initial reactions is like, I don't know, I don't think you can. Because I think part of what's so powerful about particularly our experiences with facilitating restorative practices and restorative processes for hate crimes is that it's micro, is that it's about relationship, right? And it's about these particular people in this particular room and what they need in order to shift and move forward and to be able to be in relationship, even if they never talk to each other again, to be in relationship across those differences and across that harm and to resolve that. And so I think, part of my thinking, maybe this is small-minded, is like, we just got it just one by one, and that I think there are ripples from that in the same way that there were ripples from the initial harm. I think there are ripples from the healing, for all of them. I mean, I have so much confidence that the 5 people with 6 people with the support people that were in those conferences are walking out in a way, and they're walking through the world in a different way because of that transformative experience that Kimiko and I didn't create, Roman and Erica didn't create, but we sort of held space for and facilitated. And I think I'll share that one of our participants from this conference, one of the women who was harmed, shared later with us as we were talking about her experience. She said she works in a role where she works with children. And she said, it's so funny. I didn't expect this, but after the conference, I find myself looking at and seeing these kids I work with in a different way. And like, well, that wasn't a stated goal of our conference, but that's the lasting impact of this sort of one-by-one approach to healing harm.
Thank you so much for that. We are a little pressed for time here. So what I'm going to do is mention one question from the chat, Malika's question, if she can frame it very quickly. And then I'm going to open up, turning to Mike, if he'd like to speak to those or whatever else he'd like to add. And then facilitators can come in with some final comments. We do have a hard stop at 8. I'm sorry about that. You will see some things in the chat that offer some opportunities to connect with Restorative Arlington, and we really hope that you will reach out. We have a lot of exciting things going on, so take a look at that. All right, let me do very quickly what I just outlined. In the chat, we have a great question. Wondering why people who are responsible for an event or an incident would feel that they want to participate in a conference, because it would be very hard for them and they'd have to face up and own up to their vulnerability. How does one overcome those difficulties? So let's put a pin in that for a second. We may not get to everything, but Malika, could you ask your question briefly? Unmute and ask your question, and we'll put that on the table too. Then we'll turn to Mike.
Oh. Can you hear me, Susan?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. So first I wanted to thank all our panelists for the wonderful work that they are doing. And I was really impressed by the stories that Heather and Roman shared and how Mike was sharing his experience. Just wanted to share very briefly the experience from my country, because I'm coming originally from Tajikistan and currently I'm in China. And just wanted to say that we are doing very similar work in Tajikistan when it comes to the aggressors or perpetrators of domestic violence or intimate violence. Roman said that usually we try not to use those words like perpetrators or aggressors, so like a responsible party, right? And of course, like it shows also positive results because those people who are the perpetrators of intimate partner violence, they also don't want to go and sit in like prison for several years or like go through the court. And such rooms, so we call them the rooms for aggressors of domestic violence or perpetrators of domestic violence, exist in several cities of Tajikistan. So and more and more counselors and psychologists say that like as long as you work with those people, it usually shows the positive results. But when it comes again, like to the accountability, like in Moldova, for example, in the Republic of Moldova, it's in their legislation that the perpetrators of intimate violence or domestic violence, they have to go through the restorative justice. And if it doesn't go, then they will go through the court. So like a long story short, I think if it's in the legislation, it can really show really positive results because people in Moldova, the experts working on gender-based violence, they say that this is something that needs to be introduced in the legislation of many countries. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Malika. Thank you for sharing that. And it really dovetails very nicely with activities going on at Restorative Arlington in terms of restorative justice for intimate partner violence and sexual violence. We are going down that road and in a really important way. Let me turn to Mike and then open back to our panelists.
Thank you, Susan. I just wanted to add to the conversation about how toxic masculinity maybe contributes to some of what we're seeing here and some of the more violent offenders. In the case that I participated in, the offending party came from a demographic that is, they're being taught how to do things that make you feel like a man, but they're not teaching these young men how to be men. Carry a gun because a real man carries a gun and can protect his family, but they're not actually teaching these young men how to protect their families. It's not all about carrying a gun. You protect your family by creating a safe environment, that, you know, providing, doing things that create a future for those around you, standing up for people with a lesser voice than you. The actual tenets of being a man are not being taught. And so they focus on, almost in a sense, like posing, you know, and it's not teaching them how to, like, you know, Roman mentioned regulating your emotions and being able to channel anger. You know, one of the things that, you know, I was always taught is like, you know, anger is not a real emotion. It is a reaction to something. And how you deal with that is something that makes you, it defines you as a man. You know, is a man someone who just flies off the handle at every little annoyance and goes punching people in the face? No, he's not. But they're being, it's not like there's a handbook here where they're saying, hey, you know what? Somebody steps on your shoe in the grocery store, punch them in the face. It's more of a underlying aggression that's being taught in a lot of their ideology that lands them in this place where they have no control over their emotions. They don't have any outlets. They're being taught to bottle everything inside. And then it comes exploding out in these moments, like what happened to my friend. He didn't have any healthy outlets for his political beliefs. He bottled it all up, and then when he got in the first confrontation, he tased somebody. So I wish that, I hope that the process deals with emotional regulation. And a lot of men, I mean, when you look at demographics of men, there are certain demographics of men, the highest rate of suicide that we have out there. They don't understand what to do with all this rage that they think they're being told they should be feeling. And it's really sad. And that's what I was sad for this kid, really kid. I don't know if Roman would qualify. I felt like a kid who just had been told how to feel, but he doesn't realize it. He didn't realize you were told to feel this way. Who told you that you needed to walk around? I mean, I don't know where you guys are from, but I have never felt unsafe in Clarendon, Virginia. No, one time, but that's where he was with a taser. So I would say that I would hope that we are creating processes that deal with the core of why men feel like being a man means doing these what we've labeled traditionally masculine things. It had anything to do with being a man, right? And we start teaching people how to be good people. How to care for their community and the people around them, how to speak for the less fortunate. You don't need to be able to bench 300 pounds to do that. You don't need to drive a certain car. You just need to have some respect. And it starts, again, it starts with finding that within yourself. And again, this was the really sad part of our case was this is a very lost young man who did not, he's searching for himself. So of course he doesn't know how to treat anybody around him. He doesn't understand what he's feeling. He has no idea who he is. So he's dealing with substance abuse and uneven emotional regulation and all these things. And the even more sad part was his dad joined the conference. Nicest man I think I've talked to all year. So even with the environmental, like his family was there, it was there for him. Dad looked exasperated, like I don't know what else to do for my son. It seemed like he tried to teach him these things. If he comes from an environment where all the things that I'm telling you are being taught, that shows you how strong that outside influence is on some of these young men. He came from a home with love and 2 parents and a dad who seemed very well emotionally regulated and did not get angry. He listened to what we had to say. I thought he spoke well, Roman. I didn't, that's how strong the battle is for the hearts and minds of our young men. They are destroying them for political ideology or religious ideology. And they're nowhere to be found when he gets arrested. None of those people came to bail him out of jail. It was Dad. So, yeah, I would hope that we could, from this, we could develop some processes that it's a taboo subject. It seems like dealing with your emotions when it comes to men. But being a man is not all about acting hard or acting like things don't affect you. We are not all sociopaths. We feel, and it's okay to say I'm hurt and I'm angry, but what makes you a man is how well you learn to deal with those emotions. So I just wanted to add that. I just, I'm not really into toxic masculinity or toxic femininity. I just think there's toxic and there's bad behavior and there are things that we need to address. And for young men, it's so important because of the physical capabilities that men have. When they get angry, people around them are in danger. An angry man is a dangerous one. So we definitely need to deal with the anger that this kid is being told to feel. But he did not, I want to stress, he did not come from an environment that should have produced any of that. He learned that in the corners of the internet. I'm sorry, I don't know if that's relevant. I just wanted to say that.
I think, in fact, that last point is incredibly relevant, and we got to do another session actually on how the corners of the internet are shaping a lot of this. Kimiko, I'm going to give you a second. I'm going to point people toward the chat, and then we'll come back and just if there's nothing else, I'll just do a thank you. Go.
Thanks. Really briefly, I wanted to address, I think, Anna and Nancy's questions regarding why people who are responsible for harm come into a restorative process. In my experience, they're experiencing tremendous remorse, shame, and discomfort around, the gap between how they see themselves, the type of person they want to be, and their actions and the harm they caused. And so wanting to make things right, I think is really natural for someone who is experiencing severe discomfort around their own actions. We've had many people come into our program and say, I just really need to apologize. I need them to know this isn't who I am. And then for Nancy, regarding community circles, I couldn't agree more. I think that community building work and peace building work really should be the heart of restorative justice and the movement work that we do. I think there are often obstacles to funding that type of work. And we are working really hard to train community circle keepers and peace circle keepers so that we have more community resources to deploy for that type of community building and peace building work. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you so much for saying that. The opportunities that people have to do more engagement with this work, and Rachel has kindly put some things in the chat that could be the avenues toward anyone on this call getting more involved. I want to thank so much our panelists today, Heather, Kimiko, Roman, for your willingness to share about the amazing work really that you do. And Mike, this has been incredible to hear from you. I think we've all learned. I hope as you were speaking, you saw all the support that was coming from our audience members for the things that you were saying. Shout out to Rachel. Thank you so much for the tech support. And please check out other Peace Week activities and check out other Restorative Arlington work in the future. Thank you all so much for coming tonight.